Okay, so now we're going to talk about Suprematism and Constructivism. So last time we looked at DaDa and Neue Sachlichkeit, which means new objectivity, as you know, which were both fairly, let's say, pessimistic reactions to World War I and to the general horrors of the modern world. Basically, they're movements from the early 20th century that had a kind of a negative perspective and a negative reaction and made work that was sort of cynical and pessimistic in response to things that would make you pessimistic and cynical, horrible wars and destruction and terrible things. So this is not blaming them for being pessimistic. We get it, right? But not all of the art movements at this time in the first half of the 20th century were so cynical and pessimistic. There were other groups of artists who were still motivated by the belief that art could make the world a better place and thought that if they could find some utopian truths in the way they made art, that would serve the world in a positive and productive way. So today we're going to look at two movements that kind of start out of that sort of vein. Okay, so to give you a little history about what's going on at this time, well, let's think about we're in Russia. So both of these movements take place in Russia. Russia is quite far from Paris, which at this time Paris is still kind of the center of the art world. It's the center of the art world for quite some time until it sort of shifts mid-century to New York. It stays in New York, some people would say, until present day, though with the direction our country is going, it might be Berlin or something soon. Anyway, Paris is still the center of the art world at this time, and Russia is quite far from there. But in Russia, we have people like Ivan Morozov, and what's Sergei's last name? Sergei Shukin, who both are very wealthy and they buy lots of art. They're friends with Gertrude Stein, who I mentioned in connection with Matisse and Picasso. So if you remember, Gertrude Stein is a woman who lives in Paris, and she has these salons, these gatherings of artwork and of artists and writers in her home, and has these intellectual cultural discussions. So Ivan and Sergei are Russian friends of hers, and she invites them to her home in Paris, where they meet Picasso, they meet Matisse, they meet all the happening avant-garde artists of the time, and they are quite taken with this new work. So these two wealthy Russians, and some other people too, these are just the two that I think of at this time, they buy a bunch of work. Sergei, particularly at one point, he loves Matisse and Picasso. He buys 37 Matisse works and 51 Picassos. This is all before 1920. So they have very extensive art collections of the avant-garde, and they take this art back to Russia with them. And they have exhibitions and salons and things to show off this artwork that they have purchased from Europe in Paris. And so the artists at the time in Russia are able to be exposed to this artwork and to see what's happening in the avant-garde in other parts of Europe, particularly Paris. Okay, so that's just like setting things up for you a little bit. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Suprematism. Again, I'm not going to read this to you. You can read. This is also available in my notes. So let's talk about this artist. Kazimir Malevich. So he's born in 1878. He dies in 1935. He's born in Kiev. Those of you who are good at geography know that Kiev is not in Russia. It is in the Ukraine. So he's born in Kiev to a Polish family. So he speaks Polish, Ukrainian, and Russian. Having a lot of languages at this time is kind of helpful because you can organize better with different groups of people. His dad managed a sugar processing factory, so basically he moved around the Ukraine as a kid with his gigantic family. He was one of 14 children, so there were a ton of siblings all around, and they moved all around the Ukraine to different beet farms. There are kinds of beets. Beets are like those red tuber type vegetables. that are sugar beets that you make sugar from, and so he spent a lot of time on these beet farms in the Ukraine as a kid. He studies drawing in Kiev, and then his father dies in 1904, and after his dad dies, he decides he can hightail it, get out of the beet farm world, and move to Moscow. So he moves to Moscow, and he goes to the Moscow School of Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture. And when he's there, he participates in several group exhibitions with other notable Russian artists at the time, other notable Russian artists who are working with abstraction. And in 1912, he starts describing his personal painting style as cubo-futurist, which is combining cubism and futurism styles to create his work. In 1914, he exhibits in Paris at the Salon Independance, so the independent salon, which we've talked about. Quite a few of the artists we've been talking about in modernism debut their kind of revolutionary work at this salon that's independent from the main academy. So he participates in that in 1914. He does some work in advertising. He does some graphic design type work. He works for a political campaign which is trying to encourage support of Russia joining World War I, participating in World War I. So he creates that kind of political work. And then he also does commercial advertising work. He does a couple of ad campaigns for a cologne called Severny, or something that looks like the word severe. Anyway, so he has kind of an advertising graphic design foray for a while. And then in 1915, he has a big breakthrough. So he publishes a manifesto in the art world, particularly in the 20th century. Manifestos are big. We see lots of them. And his manifesto is called From Cubism to Suprematism. And it's where he kind of lays down the basic premise of his movement's suprematism. So he then exhibits Black Square, which is this image on the right, at the last Futurist exhibition 010 in St. Petersburg in 1915. So on the left, I have an image of the installation of that exhibition, and on the right, I have Black Square, which we're going to talk about for a while. In the photo, you'll notice Black Square is hung sort of oddly. It looks sort of weird to us. It's in the corner and it's up at the top. The reason he positioned it this way was very particular. If you're familiar at all with, if you had Art History 1 and you studied Byzantine art and you know what an icon is, a Russian icon or an Eastern Orthodox icon, it's a painting of a saint or of the Virgin Mary or Christ. And in churches and in holy spaces, they were positioned up in the corner like that. So he's positioning his painting where a holy relic, a holy icon would be positioned, and basically saying, this is the new holy, this is the new supreme, this is the new motif of the new visual art world, and setting it up to be an icon, essentially. Okay, so I lost my place in my notes. Let's see. Okay, this painting is very important. When I first saw this painting, when I was an undergrad, I don't remember if it was in my modern art history class or in art history too, I was very dismissive of it. I scoffed at it. I was like, it's a black square on white. And then they showed me more of his paintings, which were white squares on white. And I was just like, oh, this is stupid. And I was very scoffy. I imagine you're feeling kind of scoffy right now. Maybe not all of you, but some of you are probably scoffing a little bit at this black square I'm telling you is very important. But it is very important, and so I'm going to try to convince you of this now. Okay, so here's why this square is important. It's the first time someone made a painting that was not of something. Okay, that's an odd sounding sentence, but we're going to work with it for a little bit. Okay, so I know we just looked at Wassily Kandinsky, right, in German Expressionism, the Blue Rider. And you've heard me mention a couple times that we haven't actually looked at her work yet, Helma af Klint. who was one of possibly the first abstract painter. So let me explain to you why this is different from Kandinsky or F. Clint. So this is the first time someone set out with the intention of completely abandoning reality, okay? Kandinsky was interested in painting, but he was interested in painting sound, and he was interested in the relationship of color and sound, and he was interested in painting scientific phenomena and the way they could be translated into color and expressive line. He was also interested in depicting emotion, right? This is why he's one of the German expressionists. So he has those things that, though he is painting abstractly and he is painting about abstraction as well, he still has something that is the subject of his painting. Okay? Helma F. Klint was one of the first people to dabble in abstract work, non-representational work, but she is very interested in theosophy, which we talked about when we talked about symbolism. Kandinsky is also interested in theosophy, and I'm not saying theology, by the way, or philosophy, I'm saying theosophy, okay? So this is a religious kind of study that is very interested in mysticism. So some of the early people painting abstract type work, like Helma F. Klint, were inspired by mysticism and thought that they were mystically being directed in what they were representing. Okay, it's kind of akin with some of the ideas in symbolism. So though they were doing abstract work, and it was not representational per se, it was abstract, there still is some kind of subject there. There's still something that is being depicted, even though it is in an extremely abstracted way. Okay? That is not the case with this painting. Malevich is painting nothing intentionally. That was his goal. That was what he set out to do. His white on white series gets even more nothingness going for it. So he says about this work, up until now, there were no attempts at paintings as such. Without any attribute to real life, painting was the aesthetic side of a thing, but never was an end in itself. So that is a big idea. That is a new, crazy idea. If you have not yet watched the lecture I posted called Isms, go ahead, you could pause this, it's not very long, and go watch that now. Because Malevich essentially just invented formalism with this painting. So I explain what that is in that other lecture. He writes an entire book on this concept in 1927. It's called The Nonobjective World. Okay? And I'm here to tell you he's a better painter than he is a writer. It's a little dense. But his ideas are really groundbreaking, okay? And part of it is it's so hard to put ourselves in the mindset when these breakthrough ideas are happening. Because now a totally abstract painting of a square within a square seems totally passé and done, right? It's kind of a joke at this point. But at this time, this was revolutionary stuff. This had not been done. Okay, so his ideas are groundbreaking, and I know that I've said, as we've gotten into modernism, I say the word groundbreaking a lot, and I understand that you might think that I'm being silly or hyperbolic or something, but to be real, there's a lot of ground to break. There's thousands of years of artwork going all the way back to Paleolithic times, if you've had Art History 1, where there's a lot of established tradition in place, so there's a lot of things to disrupt and break. So, this is also very groundbreaking, I promise. Okay. Okay. I keep losing my place. He writes a lot about trying to free art from the dead weight of the world, okay? So let me simplify that, and I talk about this again if you go hop over to the Isms lecture. This idea of freeing art from the dead weight of the world is basically saying he's trying to make art for art's sake. Art for its own sake. It's just about itself. Suprematism is all about the supremacy of shape and of color, even though that's not as evident in this particular example, in painting. And like I said, this is basically formalism. So this is kind of the beginning of formalism. This painting gets cited a lot as the first truly abstract painting. That's challenged. People cite other examples of paintings that were abstract before this, usually Kandinsky. In very, very recent work, some people are coming to bat for Helma F. Klint, saying that she was actually kind of the inventor of pure abstraction, but the motivations are a little different, and this piece is important. Even if you dispute that it's the first truly abstract work, it kind of smashes the last couple kind of holdouts of representationalism in work, and it is truly non-objective. Okay, so let's also put this in historical context so you can see kind of what's going on in Europe. So this painting is made, World War I is happening, the Russian Revolution happens in 1905, and then in 1917, right after this painting, we have the Bolshevik uprising, and then the October Revolution. So this is a very tense and uncertain time in Russia. So to make something that's totally advocating for the upheaval of what we know of in terms of aesthetics and the art world is kind of bold, but it also kind of reflects the way things are being shaken up at the time. I don't know how much history people have anymore, or what is that. Are you all familiar with Russian history? I'll do just to make sure that you're on the same page. So in 1917, the Russian people are very unhappy with the Tsar. The Tsar is kind of like a king. He's the ruler of Russia. And this particular Tsar is Nicholas II, I believe. Nicholas II? So you may know his last name, the Romanovs. You're familiar with the Romanovs, maybe? Anastasia. There was a Disney movie many years ago about Anastasia, the lost Romanov princess that people think somehow escaped and maybe is still out there somewhere. She probably isn't. She's probably dead in a ditch with the rest of her family. But basically, there's an uprising. People are very unhappy with the Tsar. So they rise up. All the workers strike against their conditions. The Tsar, Nicholas II, and his family, he has several other children, he abdicates, they all kind of run away, and eventually they're executed. Okay, so they're the end of the line of Tsars, of the Romanovs in Russia. Okay, so then Vladimir Lenin is installed by the party that was doing the revolting. So the Bolsheviks were part of the it was before they were called communists. They were called the Russian Social Democrats. So the Russian Social Democrats overthrow everything, and then they install Lenin, their guy, as the leader. He nationalizes all the land. It's a big, so everything is all topsy-turvy. Everything is violently overthrown, and it's a huge political, economic, and cultural upheaval in Russia. So this is what's happening when this work is being created. Okay, so that maybe that whole thing, which that was a very bad job of me summarizing a bunch of complicated Russian history, but you kind of get the idea. So all of that is happening, and that maybe explains some of the impetus to want to separate art from the world, right? To want to cut art off completely from representing the dead weight of the world, because the world is kind of crazy right now, especially in this time and place where Malevich is, and he's developing these ideas. Maybe. Okay? So what happens with this painting? Malevich dies in 1935. He dies of cancer. I don't know what kind, but he dies of cancer in 1935. At his funeral, mourners come with banners with this icon, with the black square on it, and wave them at his funeral. Then this painting disappears. It disappears for a while. After Lenin, there's more upheaval and things, and we have Stalin, and Stalin makes social realism the official state art, so you can only do social realism, which is the very kind of opposite of what this is. And so he kind of, this piece disappears. It doesn't emerge again until the 1980s. So, lots of upheaval and things happening in Russia, but this painting is very important, even if you think it's boring. Okay, let's look at this, just one more of his works from this time to show that he does use color in some of his works, because he kind of writes about color being important, and that's hard to imagine when you're looking at a black square. Okay, so this one's kind of weird to me. It's one of his more famous ones, so I include it. It's strange to me because of the title. I think the title contradicts what it is. I think the title is self-contradictory. So it says it's a suprematist composition, airplane flying. Here's why that is weird to me. Suprematism, as we've just said, is about pure feeling, is about non-objective, the non-objective world, totally divorced from reality. Malevich says, the visual phenomena of the object world are in themselves meaningless, so then why is the word airplane here? It's very strange to me for him to attach a noun that is a thing in the world to this painting that's supposed to be not about the world. So I think this is a little weird, and I don't know. I think it's a little strange. So I just want to show you some variants and some where he kind of maybe cancels out some of his own ideas and some of his work at this time. But basically his belief is that shapes in art should not be related to objects in the visual world, despite the fact that he has confusing titles sometimes. Okay, he's not the only person who is working in this movement in Suprematism. So here is a work by, and I apologize for my pronunciation on everything Russian. I have some experience with French, Italian, and German, but Russian I'm niet. Okay, so this is Lyubov Popova, maybe? She is born in 1889 and she dies tragically young in 1924. She was born in a wealthy family in Russia, very near Moscow, I believe. And her father is a cloth merchant, a textile merchant. So she begins studying art at a very young age. She has some aptitude for it from a young age that her family notices, and they encourage this. She eventually travels, I think in 1909 or 1910-ish, she travels to Italy because she's very fascinated by the Renaissance and she wants to see the old masterworks in person. So she goes to Italy. A couple years later, around 1912-ish, she goes to Paris and studies the masterworks at the Louvre and sees all the old classical work, but also then is exposed to the new avant-garde type work. And she becomes very interested in form, shape, and color. So she creates a series of works called Painterly Architectonics, which this is one of, in which she engages with suprematist ideas about color, geometry, and non-objective painting. Okay. The word architectonics was her way of creating like a connection, a morphological link between her paintings and architecture. Okay, she's someone who kind of bridges suprematism and constructivism, so that's why I like to put her here. But basically, she wants to link her paintings to architecture and to structure. Okay, so her main interest was in painterly construction and in color theory, and in ways to use color to draw the eye to different areas in a painting that then your eye eventually moves through and it sort of constructs visually this compelling whole piece. Whole, not like a hole in the ground, whole like complete. Okay. She later kind of throws in with the constructivists and participates in their major exhibition 5 × 5 = 25 exhibition, which is in 1921. She eventually becomes an instructor at the Institute of Artistic Culture, and then she quite tragically dies of scarlet fever, kind of at the height of her success. So it's a bummer. So this is one of her works from the Architectonic series. This is another one of her works from the Architectonic series. This one is a little bit more typical of them. I think this one is interesting and has some relations to later color field work. This one is a little more typical in terms of the vibrancy of the colors of the work she does at this time. A lot of them have a very similar color scheme, and most of them are vertically oriented like this. So that first one is a little bit of an anomaly from her work that I'm familiar with, at least. Okay, let's now talk about constructivism. Okay, so the figure we most associate with constructivism today is Naum Gabo. He's born in 1890, he dies in 1977. He's a sculptor. His given name is Naum Pevsner. He grew up in a large Jewish family in a small town in Russia called Bryansk. His dad was an engineer. His brother, Anton Pevsner, is also an artist and is later involved with constructivism. He's fluent in German and French and English, so he's able to travel all over Europe and converse with all different types of artists and writers and philosophers and thinkers, which is, again, kind of important at this time to be able to connect with other people. He has a really great quote about communication that I rather like. It's, as in thought, so in feeling, a vague communication is no communication at all, which I think is kind of nice. It doesn't bode well for me in my terrible quasi-reaching grasp of a few languages, but it's a nice quote. It's a nice sentiment, I think. He studied medicine in Munich at Munich University, but while he was there, he also attends art history lectures because he's interested in art history, even though he's kind of practical and is going to medical school. He then transfers. I don't think it's within the same college, but it's still in Munich. He transfers to study engineering, which, again, that's what his dad did, so that kind of, there's a familial connection there. And when after that time, he meets Wassily Kandinsky. So he meets our German expressionist friend Kandinsky, who, of course, being born in Russia from a Russian family, speaks Russian, so they have several languages they can communicate in. His brother at this time is painting in Paris. This is around like 1912, 13-ish. So he moves to Paris for a while and lives with his brother. There he's exposed to the avant-garde and what's happening in the Paris art scene firsthand. His engineering background helps him with the construction of his sculptures. Many of his sculptures were kinetic, which means they had moving mechanical parts. He moves, when World War I starts, he moves around Scandinavia for a while. He goes to Oslo and I think Copenhagen, maybe. And then he, at that time, makes his first constructivist work under his new name, Naum Gabo. So he changes his name so that he is not lumped in with his brother, so that they don't both have the same last name. That's in 1915. In 1917, he returns to Russia. He teaches for a while. He dabbles in making these relief sculptures, so they can be mounted to a wall, or two-dimensional, but they stick out. There's some relief to them. So he starts making sculptures like this. And then he experiments also with kinetic sculpture. He does more experimentations with making sculptures that have moving components. In 1920, he writes Realistic Manifesto, again, many manifestos in the 20th century, which sets out the tenets of constructivism. So, and in this document is the first time the word constructivism is used. In this document, he's also quite critical of cubism and futurism. So that's somewhere where he departs from Malevich. He thought that they were not fully abstract. So that is why he's critical of cubism and futurism, because he does not think they are fully abstract. He meets the De Stiel artist in Germany and teaches at the Bauhaus. We'll talk about both of those things very soon. Basically, his theory of art is to do with the exploration of space, which he thought could totally separate from mass. So let's look at one of his sculptures. This is called Column. So his theory is the exploration of space, but he wants it to be, the spatial exploration to be totally separate from mass, which is difficult because mass is, what takes up space, right? So he creates these formal experiments in which he's trying to make work about space without depicting mass, which, when you think about it, is maybe the only way to get more abstract than suprematism, right? He calls it constructivism because it is additive sculpture. So if you've had any art appreciation or foundations of design, 2D design, you know that there's two main kinds of sculpture. There's subtractive sculpture, where you carve away at something or you model something. And then there's additive sculpture, where you are attaching elements together and bringing things together to construct or form a sculpture. So that's why it's called constructivism. It's basically a different, more specific word for additive sculpture. He believed that art needed to exist in all four dimensions to be successful. So this was an idea the Cubists had that he liked, but he didn't think they approached it correctly. He thought them using a two-dimensional depiction of all four dimensions was kind of self-negating, was not good enough, okay? So that is Naum Gabo, who we kind of credit with the creation of constructivism. Okay, let's talk about this guy for a minute. All right. Vladimir Tatlin, he's born in 1885, he dies in 1953. He's an architect, he's a sculptor, he's a set designer, and he's a painter. He's born in Moscow. His mother was a poet, and his father was a noble-born mechanical engineer, which is an interesting combination of things. He flunks out of the Moscow School of Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture, which is where Malevich went, remember? But he does meet Malevich while he is there, and they actually are in some exhibitions together. He then goes to Krakow Arts School, but his dad dies in 1904, which cuts off his funding, and so he drops out again, and he goes and he becomes a merchant sea cadet. So he goes and becomes a sailor, essentially. He later says that his trips, his sails, his adventures as a sea cadet on the Black Sea, and he took some merchant trips to Egypt as well, and he says that they were quite inspirational for him and his work. When he is a merchant sea cadet, he also picks up a lot of carpentry training, which comes into play with his work later. So he's kind of the on-staff carpenter when he's doing that. He goes to Paris in 1913 and sees Picasso's work, which also has an impact on him and his vision and understanding of art. After the Russian Revolution, Tatlin is charged with implementing Lenin's plan for monumental propaganda. So remember, Lenin is who takes over after they get rid of Nicholas II, the Tsar. So Lenin asks him to take over this campaign, which is basically all over. There's all these monuments, these like bronze traditional kind of monuments to the czars, the past czars of Russia, the past leaders of Russia. And Lenin thinks those need to be removed. And instead, he wants Tatlin to come up with new monuments that are dedicated to basically the Soviet ideas of the time. So when he takes over this campaign, the people who were doing it before him have basically been replacing the old monuments with new monuments that look like the old monuments because they're just bronze sculptures of heroes of the revolution. And Tatlin comes in and he's like, no, this does not make sense. If we are truly going to be a new country with a new culture, we need artwork that is also new, that looks new and doesn't look like this old artwork. So he proposed this abstract monument, It was supposed to be 1,300 feet high, and it would straddle the river Neva, which is the river that passes through Petrograd. It was Petrograd then, it is St. Petersburg now. So he wanted this giant monument to kind of be impressively and imposingly situated over this big river in a large city. And his idea was that this was an abstract representation of the revolution. He also wanted it to have a functional aspect where there would be a headquarters building within it for the Russian Social Democrats, which I think by this point maybe had called them, renamed themselves the Communists, I can't remember. Anyway, he wanted there to be a party headquarters for Lenin's political party that was also in this large monument. Okay, so the monument is never realized, and we kind of only know it through these photographs that survive. There is a reconstruction of it in 1979. They made a reconstruction of this maquette, and it exists in the Centre Pompidou in Paris. Okay, so that's Totland. I include this because though constructivism has its roots in sculpture, obviously, and is very tied in and associated with sculpture, there were also two-dimensional works that are associated with constructivism. So this is Gustav Klutzes. He was a pretty central figure in constructivism, and basically a lot of the work coming out this time that's two-dimensional has a very close relationship with the beginnings of graphic design. So graphic design has some of its roots in Russia at this time with propagandic poster art and things like this that were made for the state, and then other independent works by artists who were very interested in photomontage and this idea of photomontage that kind of comes out of DaDa. So that is an interest, and of course it owes some to Papier-Collé coming from the Cubists. But basically, this artist, Gustav Klutzes, is one of the artists who is making this poster-type photomontage art. And he studied under Malevich for a while and became very interested in pure geometry and in some of the Suprematism ideas. And then he starts combining photographs, drawings, and cutouts from publications to create photomontage pieces like this one. And because he's cutting them out and putting them together, he feels like this is the two-dimensional version of constructivism, which again was Gabo named because he's constructing it. He's attaching pieces together to create it. So in the two-dimensional art styles at the time, this kind of cutting up and pasting back together work is the two-dimensional equivalency of constructivism. Okay, so that is Suprematism and Constructivism. I will see you next time when we will talk about Surrealism. Okay.